Hi guys, Raynal here, and today I want to talk about Violet. Now, before I do the deep review, if you already own Starlight, Elena, and Locke, I don't think investing in Violet is a great idea. There are very few scenarios where she's going to be better than either of those two units, and then I also think the team with a tank using Engelbert and then two evasion units is stronger than running all three evasion units together. So she's really there to add a bit more variety to your gameplay, but she won't make it better per se, in my opinion. With that said, we'll talk about her kit, how to build her, which runes to use, and in which scenarios she would actually be better than either Locke or Elena in my opinion. So let's begin. Violet is yet another unit that has courage and a ton of evasion. What she does have over Elena and Locke is mobility. She begins with 4 and 2, and then she can increase her movement through some of her abilities, so she is actually one of the most mobile evasion units in the game. She does have some good chaining capabilities, but unless you're equipping her own sub-job, you're limited to 2 hits outside of her limit break, so it's not nearly as much as what Starlight Elena brings, for example. Her damage is going to be lower than both Locke and Elena because her mods are a lot lower, so even if you try to build all-in for damage, it's not quite as high as what the other guys can get, but her counter ability is kind of nuts, where every time she dodges a physical attack, she is going to hit back, so that part is really cool. Now, let's take a look at her TMR, and frankly, not a reason to pull for her. I don't think this will see any play at all. It has good stats, some HP, some evasion, and some critical evasion, and then it has an ability that restores AP and decreases hate. Overall, you won't really run this over bells. If you want an ability that gives you AP and something else, I think you are either going to want Summer Killface TMR for 20 AP and Shell. There are a bunch of effects that I think have just more value than this TMR, so it won't really see much play in my opinion. Now, onto the stats, and it's pretty easy to find who to compare her to. In terms of HP, it's middling, same level as Locke, so it's acceptable. She's got a little bit less attack than what Locke has, but a lot more agility, and this is one of her main edges, is she's just very, very fast, which is something that I like to see on an evasion unit. She does have a little bit less luck than these two, so a little bit less evasion, but frankly, the amounts are so close that it won't make a big difference. And then her resistances are also pretty good. She's got good slash, strike, and magic resistances, and only a weakness to pierce, and there's not that many units that leverage pierce, so it's a good weakness to have. And then in terms of status effects, resistance to stop is something I really, really like. It's an extremely annoying status effect, so a major pro right here. Overall though, very similar stats to the other light evasion units. It's not the area that I think we should look at if we want to make a difference between those units. It's really more their kit. So let's look at her passives. I think in almost every scenario you will be running the top two. One gives her attack and crit rate. Crit rate is very important for her because she has abilities that depend on crit to have their entire effect. So even if you don't care about the damage part of the crit, you do still want to be building for crit a little bit because this just makes her work in general. Then the second passive is her only source of defense penetration in her kit, and it also gives her evasion. As an evasion unit, you want as much of it as you can get, and defense penetration is also pretty important for an attacker. So I think you'll want these almost every time. If you're specifically going for a gunner build for some reason, then you could equip the range up, but otherwise I would stick to these two, I think. Then in terms of counter abilities, she's got a very unique ability where whenever a physical attack misses her, she will counter, so there's no chance to proc. It happens if an attack misses her, that is physical based. She will increase her own slash resistance penetration and then deal damage. First, this is her only source of slash resistance penetration, so if this doesn't happen, she doesn't have any. But it is fairly reliable, as in whenever somebody misses her, it's going to happen. The interaction with multi-hit attacks is if any of the hits from the multi-hit attack hits her, she does not counter. So it's not especially good against multi-hit attacks, but rather it's one way to counter her, potentially. But still, it's a really interesting counter. It's the first unit that has something like this, and it's definitely very effective if you're fighting a team that can't hit you reliably. Now, let's look at her main kit. The first thing I want you guys to look at is the mods in the abilities in this kit. She does not have a 200% mod ability, and because of that, she hits naturally less hard than Locke and Elena can, because they both have very high mod abilities in their kit. The ability with the highest mod in Violet's kit is her kind of basic ability, which is at a range of 1, so it's kind of hard to land, but it is there. She has a 175 mod. Then she's got one buff that increases crit rate and crit damage. It is good because she needs to crit for some of her abilities, but overall I think her other buff is a lot more impactful. Then she's got an ability that decreases defense by 30, deals damage, and then has a chance to paralyze. This is kind of the bread and butter of her kit for single target damage, and it is her ability that has a 2-hit, so she can chain a little bit with that. But mostly it's going to hit a bit harder than you would think from a 165 mod because it decreases defense before dealing damage. If you've seen a lot of Halloween Frederica, it will have similar damage to her Drain Flurry, so it will be really good against enemies that don't have a lot of defense because it will take their defense in the negatives and then deal scale off of that, but against any other enemy it's going to be an average damage type ability. The next one that Violet has is an edge over Starlight, Elena, or Locke because it's a diamond pattern attack and they don't have that. So that is really good. It's going to deal damage, and then if she crits, it decreases the target's AP and recovers her own. Now that part is a lot weaker than Locke's because Locke, even if he misses, will recover that 15 AP. In her case, it has a very high AP cost of 34 and she only refunds 10 if she crits on at least one target, so she has a pretty good chance of not refunding any AP and then potentially running low if you're not using bells. Because of this, she is kind of lucked in using a AP generation TMR, which is one of her weaknesses, I guess. You really have to hone in on that if you want to be able to spam your abilities. Her next buff, though, really unique, and I think it's one of her edges. The light teams love to have very high agility, lap their enemies, build chains, and kill them. It's their main way of taking down their opponents, especially against tanks. And what she does is she gives a buff for allies that whenever they crit for the next 3 turns, they gain 15% of their turn gauge back. So that makes them act quicker, which in turn leads to more chaining and more damage. So I like that buff quite a bit. It's very unique, and it might be one of the reasons why she's interesting. Meanwhile, she also increases her own evasion, which is quite important, and then her final buff is courage. So we know how that ability goes for evasion units. It is very strong. Now, her limit break, I find very lackluster. It's a 200% mod attack, so her one hardest hitting ability. It has a innate 50% crit chance, so it will naturally crit pretty much every time. And then it's a 3-hit attack. That's what it is. It's not going to reduce the enemy's slash resistance or remove their chance to counter for a couple turns. It just does that. It's a single target ability. It's there, it's going to build a chain. It's interesting, but I don't think it's game changing. If you really want to be able to build chains several times, you will have to equip her own sub-job, because she has an ability that is a 3-hit attack. It only has a mod of 131 though, so it's going to hit a bit weaker than some other of her abilities, but it could set up a chain so that somebody else, like Starlight, Elena, or Locke, just comes in and finishes your enemy. And then she's got another buff that could increase her light attack, but I think that's weaker than the other buffs in her kit, so the main reason to use this sub-job is really if you want to be able to build more chains. Otherwise, the sub-job I'm the most excited about is the Duelist sub-job. You have a buff that increases evasion and single target resistance, which could be good in some matchups, or another AoE option that increases AoE resistance and then gives some AP refresh back. If for some reason she's not using bells on your team, you want this passive because it's your only way of being able to use a lot of abilities. So if you have to share your AP management TMRs and she's not the one that ends up with it, you really need that buff. It's only for herself, unlike Cloud, so she's not going to give AP restore to everybody, but at least she can manage her own thanks to that. And then she's got another buff that can increase her movement by 1, and if you're playing her manually, this makes her kind of crazy, because you now have a move 5 unit that dodges a lot of hits and is able to build chain for your other guys. The other abilities are quite average. You have a longer range attack that has a good crit chance. Then her other ability is a line hit that deals damage and decreased accuracy, which could be very good if she is partnered with other light evasion units. Now, the Gunner sub-job is pretty standard. You've got a buff that increases missile attack and range, so it could be really good if she's paired with other missile attackers, but, I mean, you could use her, I guess, as a support to Jade and Fina and increase their damage in a way. It would make for a weird team, but I could see that work. Outside of that, it's a sub-job we've seen very often, so I won't dwell on it for too long. So what does this look like in a build? Well, she's got pretty low overall HP. Just like Locke, if she survives a hit, it's because it was very close to being a kill. She doesn't have incredible resistances overall, although 33% or 30% resist to magic is pretty good in that scenario. And then 551 luck is it seems really high, but it's normal for evasion units in the Rune era. So it's good. She's going to dodge a lot. She's got a good 1500 attack, which is kind of standard. So none of these stats are especially outstanding to me, but it is a good stat line. Good luck, good agility, good attack, and okay HP because she has courage that can save her if she takes that hit that one-shot KOs her. And then in that scenario, she has a lot of defense penetration, but does not have slash resistance penetration. And again, if she doesn't proc her counter, she doesn't really have a way to deal with slash resistance, which is one of her weaknesses. Now, I don't want to talk about team building too much. I think we've seen a lot of light evasion teams, and you probably know what you want to use her for if you pull for her. But let's look at her runes very quickly. And runes for light evasion, you have a few options, but I think you always want a rune set and an agility set. Reason being, the agility set gives you some evasion, the luck set gives you evasion as well, and that's just how you go. And then you want a luck set over an evasion set, mostly because the extra luck also increases your accuracy, and in case of a mirror matchup, it decreases the chances that you lose that RNG battle of am I hitting the enemy team. So this is where we go. You have a bunch of leeway for the passives, but I think on your defensive side, you at least want the 10% luck up and the 10% HP. The rest can be, you can play around a little bit and do it to your liking. And then on the offensive side, there isn't that much leeway. I think you definitely want the plus 10 accuracy because you're not going to be running a Alexandrite ring, and again, in those mirror matchups, you want every little edge you can get to hit the enemy team. You also want some acquired AP and some attack, and then depending on what you like, I like putting healing power, slash resistance penetration, and then either defense penetration or crit rate. It's a tough call, but there's a lot of stuff that she needs to be made a lot stronger through her runes. So we've looked at the build very quickly. I think the most interesting discussion is, where would you run her over somebody like Locke? And it's a really tough call. I think in Odo, in most scenarios, you want to run Locke at all costs, because Locke brings the spell Dagger, which removes hate from a tank, allowing the rest of your guys to just ignore the enemy tank and kill the enemy backline. This is the main edge that Locke brings to a team, and it's extremely good. Like, I've seen that happen a couple times where my tank was the last unit alive on the board, and that should never happen in my mind, and it's all because of the spell Dagger. Violet brings nothing similar. What she does have over Locke is a diamond shape attack. Again, she can hit several enemies in a single AoE. She's got better movement, she's got a great counter ability, so if you're fighting a team that is not very accurate, she will mow them down very quickly, so that is good. But on the other end, Locke sets your team up very well. He's got a Slash Emperor, he can barrier break, he's got a more reliable AP steal, and then he doesn't necessarily need bells because he has his own AP refresh, which also gives him re-raise. I think overall, in Odo, in most scenarios, I prefer Locke, again, because he allows your team to ignore the enemy tank, and that is very, very high value. And then if you're thinking more in manual, then yeah, I would see a lot of use for Violet, because that larger AoE coupled with better movement makes her a unit that has a better initiative and better control over the map, which I value quite a lot as a manual player. So if she's a tough replacement for Locke, is she a good one for Elena? Again, really tough decision. I think in most scenarios I would prefer to run Elena, because Elena has much better damage. She's got high mods, but also her damage scales of her own faith and her enemy's faith, so she is able to bust enemies a lot more easily than what Violet will do. Elena also has better chaining capabilities, so she can go through barriers better, she can build chain better for the other guys. So if you're just thinking damage, Elena wins. She also has magic type attacks to bypass slash resistance and a good amount of init slash resistance, so she really has good ways to mitigate that form of defense as well. What you do get from Violet, again, is the larger AoE, or I guess if you wanted a pure physical team for some reason, because you know your enemy will be really good against magical scaling attacks, then that could be another way to go at it. But overall, I think in JP, we've seen a lot of Violet play, and that was because there was no Starlight Elena at the time of her release. And ever since Starlight Elena has been released in JP, I've seen a lot less play with Violet, because I feel like she's not by a large margin, but I still feel like Starlight Elena is a slightly superior unit if you compare both side to side. Now, if I'm putting my manual hat back on, again, really love what Violet brings. Her extra mobility makes her a lot better in terms of map control and what she can do, and in manual, I would see a team with both Violet and Locke, or maybe even the triple light evasion teams, because you don't need a tank in that manual team. Enemies will ignore hate naturally. So I don't really recommend players pull for Violet in general, just because we've been having so many good units released in a short amount of time, and then there's going to be the Water Warrior of the Crystal. There's a lot of good stuff still in the future, so unless you're a heavy spender or you're super thrilled for her and you want to get her at all costs, I feel like you would be better investing into something that actually makes your account massively different or massively stronger, instead of a unit that just gives you, oh, I'm gonna run Violet instead of Locke today for fun. So that's my overall feeling. Again, you guys do whatever you like. I am personally going to be sitting this one out, even though I would love to get her for manual purposes. I don't really have the viz for that, so I'll leave it be, unless there is a great banner that gives me either a Joker or Violet, in which case I would roll the dice, but chances are I'll just be skipping the entire Persona collaboration. So this is it from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will be back soon.